because they graduated high school in 91, because she graduated there.
Yeah.
All right. This is a pretty good crowd. I'm feeling pretty good about this. This is our final Hawk Talk of the season. And I think it's pretty safe to say we saved the best for last. This is one of those ones that when Jen first talked to me about talking about this issue it's not new. There have been book bans before, but there is a new wave. There is a new issue that is upon us. I wasn't excited about the topic. I was excited about having somebody who knows a lot about the topic bring information to us. And so Jen Ippensen is the Director of Library Services here at Northeast Community College. She received her Master's in Education Curriculum and Instruction, specializing in English from the University of Nebraska-Kearney. I always want to say Kearney, but I'm not Nebraska. And Kearney makes me think carnival. But I'm getting off topic here. And she also has a second Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from the University of Nebraska-Omaha. She writes literary fiction, creative nonfiction, and the occasional poem. She is founder and co-editor and chief of Vast Chasm magazine and a strong supporter of the Right to Read, which I believe is an organization.
Well, we're going to talk about it.
Oh, so she's going to get into this. In other words, Jen Ippensen is a professional at all of this. These are things that she's been dealing with throughout her career. In addition to being our current librarian, also spent some time teaching high school, I believe. She is not the casual observer of the issues we're facing. She is somebody that's been on the front lines with this. So, I leave you, Jen Ippensen.
All right, thank you. Welcome everyone. Thank you, Paul, for organizing the Hawk Talk lecture series, and thank you to everyone for being here tonight. I have a presentation I'll share with you. There will be some opportunity for audience participation, but please don't be worried. Like in the back, don't feel like you have to run away. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions and discussion. Throughout, if you need to get up and use the restroom, get some more food, fill your cups, please do so. It's important to take care of your body. So, I would like to begin with these words from the American Library Association's Freedom to Read statement. The freedom to read is essential to our democracy. It's continuously under attack. In recent years, we have seen unprecedented efforts to restrict access to information. Before we get too far in, I want to provide some key definitions and an explanation of where the data come from. So first, some key definitions. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about book challenges and book bans. So we want to understand the difference. A challenge is an attempt to have a library resource or program removed or to restrict access to it based on the objections of a person or a group. So that's someone trying to have it banned. And then a ban is the actual removal of materials from a library based on the objections of a person or a group. And then related is the term censorship, and that is the suppression of ideas and information that certain people, whether it be individuals, groups, or government officials, find objectionable or dangerous. And censors, or the people who want materials to be censored, try to use the power of the state to impose their view of what is truthful and appropriate or offensive and objectionable on everyone else, rather than letting every person decide for themselves. So censors will pressure public institutions like libraries to suppress and remove from public access information they judge to be inappropriate or dangerous, so that no one else has the chance to read it and view the material and make it up their own minds about it. The censor wants to prejudge materials for everyone else. And it's worth noting that challenges and bans are not limited to books. They go beyond print materials and include things like library displays and programming. But for the most part, we're going to be talking about books tonight. So where does the data come from? And who's involved in this work on a daily basis? So The American Library Association, or the ALA, is the oldest and largest library association in the world. Founded in 1876, the mission of the ALA is to provide leadership for the development, promotion, and improvement of library and information services and the profession of librarianship in order to enhance learning and to ensure access to information for all. And a little bit more about the American Library Association. It's the foremost national organization providing resources to inspire library and information professionals to transform their communities, and they do that through essential programs and services. For more than 140 years now, the ALA has been a trusted voice for academic, public, school, government, and specialty libraries, advocating for the profession and the library's role in enhancing learning and ensuring access of information for all people. If you would like more information about the ALA, you can visit them at ala.org. But it was back in 2001 that the ALA began tracking attempted book removals. So reports of attempted censorship are collected by the ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom. And we should keep in mind that the statistics we look at tonight only represent what is reported to them. And so it's, and what they've been able to gather through media reports and things like that. So there's a very good chance that the actual attempts to ban materials are much higher. So between 2000 and 2009, what do you think was most frequently challenged in the United States? We're going back 2000 to 2009, and you can just shout it out. Ideas of what was most challenged. People did not want you to read this. Yeah.
Mockingbird?
Oh, To Kill a Mockingbird? Yeah. Great guess, and frequently challenged, but that's not it.
Huckleberry Finn?
Huckleberry Finn, also frequently challenged. I have seen some statistics that say The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is the most challenged book of all time, but there's some discrepancy. But that's a hot one. We're thinking about the years 2000 to 2009. Did somebody else have one?
I said Moby Dick. Moby Dick.
Moby Dick. Oh, you all have some really good guesses. It is the Harry Potter series.
Yeah.
And does anyone want to say why?
The devil.
Right? Witchcraft and witchery. Yes, that's why. So just kind of interesting, the things that people get upset about. So then in 2015, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. In 2015, there were a total of 275 unique titles that were reported as challenged. So that's about 10 years, almost 10 years ago, right? 275. In 2020, 273 unique titles were challenged. So we're staying pretty even there. During the 2 decades prior to 2021, the average number of unique titles targeted per year since the ALA started tracking data, which was again in 2001, the average per year was 273. So less than 300 books. In 2021, something changed. There was an increase of 485%. Bringing the total number of unique titles challenged to 1,597. In 2022, the number was 2,571. So we saw another increase of 61%. And let's see what happened in 2023. This is the most recent data available. It just came out. So today I was plugging in some numbers here.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Last year, 4,240 unique titles were challenged, another increase of 65%. So censorship is clearly and dramatically on the rise. In 2023 in Nebraska, There were 11 attempts to restrict access reported, with 62 titles challenged in those attempts. So, what are your responses to this? I'm wondering if you are surprised, not surprised, concerned. What are some of your reactions to seeing this?
I just want to know what changed. Like that is such an insane change. Even if we were to agree that this is a good thing, something changed.
Okay, so Paul is saying he wants to know what has changed, right? Whether this is something you think is good or bad, right? Something must have changed right here to have that skyrocket. So what are some of the influences at play? That's a great question.
Could be both the popularization of being able to report and challenge books, and also the new big increase of lots of increase of misinformation and dramatization of lots of sort of stuff and challenging of news.
Blowing things up more.
Okay.
Or just
Yes, I wish I could have given you the mic because you just made several good points. First, help me make sure I get them. So first of all, it might be an increase in knowledge that you can report, right? So maybe more people are aware of this and are submitting more reports to say, hey, ALA, this is happening in my community. So that's one possibility. And then you said an increase in the spread of misinformation and dramatization of what's really going on. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. Those are some really great ideas. What else?
It scares me.
Scary? Okay. Do you want to say why it's scary?
Because I'm familiar with Orwell.
Okay. Familiar with Orwell. That's a good reason.
Any radical change is all. I guess I should just talk on
You
here.
have a mic.
It's going to go green. There we go. Any radical change is always going to feel unsettling, even if it's something that I feel is positive.
Right.
We like our world to stay the same. So some of this is just unsettling because of the change itself. But the idea that the change is coming from the idea of wanting to limit people's ability to get their hands on information. Now, I'm sure we'll get to it. If not, I'm going to ask you later on about, isn't it appropriate to censor some things? Maybe. But something, as we just said, something changed. And it kind of scares me that all of a sudden we feel like we need to limit a lot more information.
Okay. Great point.
Yeah, I just had a question. What do you have a percentage breakdown of what groups were challenging this? Are we talking about government organizations or not-for-profits or like social media groups?
This is a good question. I don't know that I have percentages on that, but there are definitely some national groups that are putting this pressure on and creating lists and giving them to their supporters and saying, hey, go challenge these books. And sometimes it's up to 100 books on a list that they'll challenge at once. And so the ALA has said part of this dramatic increase is that we're no longer seeing like an elementary child's mom who sees a book and is like, oh, I think the librarian maybe should take another look at this. I'm not sure it's appropriate, which is great to have parents involved in saying those kinds of things. That's what it used to be. And then the library staff could review that and go through the reconsideration process. But now it is, like you said, groups. Some of them might be Moms for Liberty, the Protect Nebraska Children PAC, and those kinds of organizations. They either put together lists or they're getting lists from someone else and then pushing them out to whoever is involved with that. And so, yeah, that is impacting the numbers for sure.
I don't mean to jump ahead, but do you have like a percentage or a number of books that these challenges that did proceed and actually did go into actually being banned? Or?
Oh yeah, great question. How many of the challenges, right? Because we're looking at the number of challenges. How many of them result in some sort of restriction? I don't have a solid number, but the director of the Office for Intellectual Freedom, I think it was, who said it's maybe around half. And restriction can be a lot of different things. It could be take it off the shelf and throw it away. It could be move it to another place where it's harder for the intended reader to find it. It could be putting it on a back shelf, where someone has to ask for access to it. It could be putting it on a list of books where young people no longer have access to that and they have to get a permission slip or something to be able to read it. So there are lots of ways restriction can be put into place. But yeah, I think it is around half of the time. Good questions. Okay, so we can have lots more conversation. I love it that you're curious and having questions and ideas. But I want to take a look at this too. So we have 4,240 unique titles targeted, and these came from 1,247 attempts to ban or restrict library materials and services last year. So when we saw that big spike up to 4,240, that's where we're seeing multiple titles challenged at a time, because it came from about 1,200 different attempts. And as I said, the ALA has noted that we're seeing huge increases because people are sometimes bringing a whole list. So I would like to hear from you, what are some of the potential problems associated with this? And I think we've mentioned maybe a few of them. But
I
when,
would
go ahead.
imagine that one of the problems is people are asking to ban books if they don't know what the book said.
Absolutely.
So groupthink.
Yeah, many times the people who challenge a book have not read the book, right? They might have someone say to them, well, this book has profanity in it, or here's 2 sentences from this book, and no one should be allowed to read it. Yeah, T.
I think it restricts the intellectual freedom of both the writers, people publishing, but also the people reading, which in effect affects their critical thinking.
Absolutely. Writers and readers, everyone is being restricted. And critical thinking, so important to us as a society, right? We want to increase that and do more of it, not less.
I think also there's a judgment thing going on where people are making assumptions about other folks, and therefore it's divisive and almost like you have to be secretive about your real life experiences, which might not be all hunky-dory, and so I think, yeah, looking at other people and being judgmental about their lifestyles.
Right.
Things like
Yeah. In the back, can you hear from that mic? A little bit, we're not sure.
Could you kind of repeat that?
Yeah, I'll do a quick summary. So there's an issue of judgment going on, where then people are being judged for maybe what their lived experience has been, and they're feeling like they need to be more secretive because they're not accepted for that. Is that kind of a summary?
And it's divisive.
And it's divisive, right. Yes, we're seeing a lot of divisiveness over these issues.
It sort of could create taboos against any sort of genres or themes or ideas inside these books, and create a sort of bad view or just bad influence of these ideas just because of the act of trying to suppress it. Is well, general people would probably think if people are trying to suppress it, it's probably not good then.
Right. Yeah, without being fully informed about it, then people are making a decision. Oh, somebody said this is a bad book, whatever that means, right? Or that this topic is something we shouldn't talk about, and then that kind of colors people's perceptions of it.
I'd also be concerned about religious freedom. Religious freedom, I think, can be interpreted really broadly of just moral freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that some of the challenges people have said is, well, you don't like pornographic material, take the Bible off the shelf. And, if you feel like you don't like Islam, and you might not even know anything about Islam. Maybe you never read the Quran, but take the Quran or the Hadith off the shelf.
Right.
It's the type of thing that even the ones who may feel like they're promoting a certain morality, it eats itself alive over time. Is it all banned at all?
Right, and that is sort of the slippery slope idea, right? That some people are saying these particular books and topics should be banned. And so if we allow that, then the question is what's next? And when does it become the Bible or the Quran or whatever? Everyone should have intellectual freedom. We should have access to different ideas, to be able to read books and view materials and make our own judgments about them. We should be developing our critical thinking skills and then exercising those.
Well, and following on that, I think that as we limit access to ideas, we lose the development of new ideas. And so the broader solutions, the unique solutions, we lose access to those simply because we haven't been exposed to the thoughts that can lead to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like if you've ever been asked to come up with an innovative idea and you sat alone and thought about it and you're like, I don't know. And then you get together with a group and you brainstorm and then somebody else's idea leads you to think of a thing you would have never thought of on your own and it gets better and better. That's the same kind of thing, right? But we need access to these ideas. Whether we agree with them or decide they're the best idea or not, we should still have access to them and be able to think about that. Okay, great input. A couple of other things that I kind of put on my list as far as what are the potential problems associated with what's going on here. Silencing certain voices, which relates to some of the things you've said. And of course limiting access, but also overwhelming school and library staffs. If someone brings in a book of 100, or a list of 100 books that your staff now needs to reevaluate, they have to read every one of those books, research it, put together really, a firm argument about whether or not it should be retained in the collection. That's a lot of work. And these are people who are already working full-time with their regular duties. And so that can be an overwhelming task. And I don't know if that's part of the reason why people do this or not. I don't know, what is motivating them. But it is one concern. And then also, just furthering the assault on intellectualism. We've seen it a lot when people are critical of college faculty and do they really know what they're talking about? Or are they trying to, warp our children's minds or
indoctrinate?
There's sort of this idea that's been growing, and these kinds of things further that. And then along with that, erosion of trust in professional authority, right? Librarians and school media specialists, people who work in the profession have been trained to evaluate materials and make these decisions. And many years ago, people trusted that they are professionals and can do that. And there's kind of, people are trying to get other people to question that now. And then, of course, as the Freedom to Read statement says, it's a threat to our democracy. And I think, Paul, you kind of touched on that, right? At what point does it kind of spiral out of control? So that's why it's important, even if I don't like a book or I don't want to read it, that doesn't mean that any of you shouldn't have access to it. So I want to show you here, this is Lori Halls Anderson. Some of you may recognize her or know her name. She's an author whose work has been frequently challenged over the last 2.5 decades. And my favorite quote of hers is not her most famous, but I wish it was. So she said, "Censorship has nothing to do with protecting children. It has to do with protecting adults who don't want to have difficult conversations with those children." And I saw this quote from her many years ago, and it really stuck with me. And if you go and Google, quotes by her, this is not going to come up easily. She has said a lot of other things on this topic, but I really think this one is impactful, at least to me. It's looking at, what are some of those motivations, and does it make sense that people are saying, well, this is bad for kids? Is it really bad for kids, or is it just that it's difficult to have conversations about things that maybe are uncomfortable? So she is the author of the book Speak. We have it in our collection if anyone wants to check it out. And I have my computer, so you could do it tonight. And so
yeah, that's professional.
She wrote this book Speak. It was published in 1999, and it continues to be fairly popular. It was a National Book Award finalist, and it is frequently challenged along with some of her other work. And this book was banned at least 14 times during the 2022-2023 school year. So not that long ago, at least 14 times banned, not just challenged. And Speak is a young adult fiction about a 14-year-old girl's battle with depression after she's raped by an older peer. In 2019, Anderson's poetic memoir called Shout, so this was called Speak, and then she wrote a memoir called Shout. In 2019 it was published, and it's been called a manifesto for the Me Too era. In this book, Anderson shares about several life-changing experiences, including her personal experience of being raped at the age of 13. The book begins like this. This is the story of a girl who lost her voice and wrote herself a new one. So it's pretty powerful stuff. And we know that horrible things happen. Sometimes horrible things happen to children or to young adults. When we stand for the freedom to read and against censorship, we help ensure that survivors know they are not alone. That Black and brown and Indigenous and poor and gay and trans people know they are not alone. Every person has the right to see themselves reflected in the library collection. They also have the right to learn about people who are different from themselves. Access to information and to a wide variety of stories helps us learn and deepen understanding and feel more empathy and sometimes feel less alone. Books can not only change lives, but can also save lives. And libraries and librarians play a crucial role in providing access and promoting equity. So Speak is one example, but let's take a look at the newly released Top 10 Most Frequently Challenged Books of 2023. Excited about the data? So, here we go. Number 10, Patricia McCormick's Sold. This is a young adult novel that chronicles the experience of a girl from Nepal who is sold into sexual slavery. It's a National Book Award finalist. And why was it challenged? Claims of it being sexually explicit and including rape. Number 9, Let's Talk About It, The Teen's Guide to Sex, Relationship, and Being a Human by Erica Moen and Matthew Nolan. This is a graphic novel covering relationship, friendship, gender, sexuality, anatomy, body image, safe sex, sexting, jealousy, rejection, sex education, and more. There have been claims that it is sexually explicit, it includes sex education, and LGBTQIA+ content. We have a tie for number 7 and 8. So the first one is Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, a novel by Jesse Andrews. A socially awkward teenage boy and his acquaintance befriend a classmate who has been diagnosed with leukemia. In 2015, this was made into a movie, and it's been challenged, the book has been challenged based on claims of being sexually explicit and containing profanity. Tied for position 7 and 8 is Tricks by Ellen Hopkins. 5 troubled teens fall into prostitution as they search for freedom, safety, community, family, and love. Complaints include sexually explicit, drugs, rape, and LGBTQIA+ content. Ellen Hopkins has written multiple books that have been targets of censorship. And we don't have Tricks in our collection here, at least not yet, but we do have some of Ellen Hopkins' other books. If you're interested, they're on a table up here, if you want to just kind of see what her style is like. Moving on to number 6, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. You've maybe heard of this. It's challenged for containing rape, incest. It's claimed to be sexually explicit, and it has equity, diversity, and inclusion content. That is actually a reason people say they don't like it. And we'll talk more about The Bluest Eye a little bit later. Number 5, Flamer, a semi-autobiographical graphic novel by Mike Curato, who is a Filipino-American writer and illustrator of children's books. This is set in 1995 in a Boy Scout summer camp. Flamer tells the story of Aiden, who is bullied for his appearance, including acting in a manner that is considered stereotypical of gay men. It has been challenged for having LGBTQIA+ content and for claims of being sexually explicit. Flamer is generally considered to be for upper grades, like 10th through 12th grade. Number 4, The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. It's claimed to be sexually explicit, contains LGBTQIA content, rape, drugs, and profanity. Set in the early 90s, the novel follows Charlie, an introverted and observant teenager, through his freshman year of high school. Number 3, This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson. You guessed it. This book has been challenged for having LGBTQIA+ content, also for providing sex education, and of course, it's claimed to be sexually explicit. We'll talk a little bit more about this, so I'm going to move on here. Number 2, All Boys Aren't Blue. Look at this beautiful book. Isn't it gorgeous? I just love the cover of this. Every time I see it, kind of out and about, I'm like, oh, so pretty. This is a memoir manifesto by George M. Johnson, who's a journalist and activist. The book is categorized as young adult nonfiction, and it's about growing up Black and queer and always feeling different, but not having the words to express it. It's been challenged for LGBTQIA+ content and claims of being sexually explicit. And I don't know, does anybody want to do a drum roll for number 1? We're almost there. Number 1. For at least 3 years running, the number 1 most challenged book, Genderqueer, a memoir by Maya Kobabe, challenged for LGBTQIA+ content and claims of being sexually explicit. The book started as a way to explain to Maya's family what it means to be non-binary and asexual. Genderqueer is more than a personal story. It is a useful and touching guide on gender identity, what it means and how to think about it for advocates, friends, and humans everywhere. It recounts the author's journey from adolescence to adulthood, including exploration of gender identity and sexuality. And it's been at the top of the list. It's here. Oh, it's here somewhere. It's right here. Again, you can check it out tonight if you want to. So let's talk about this. I would like to know, what do you notice about these books, and what do many of them have in common? And before we shout that out, have a little conversation at your tables. Everyone's nearby. You have an elbow partner, right? Except for T. Sorry, T. You can write it down, share. Just whatever comes to mind for you. What did you notice as I shared that list? What do they have in common?
It's clear we got gay marriage, trans people coming out of the closet, and Americans lost their shit. The thing that really sticks out to me, we had with D&Ds, but everything with all this, we started saying gay people are coming out of the closet and they should adopt kids because they're all pedophiles. All
right, let's find a way to wrap up those conversations. I'm sure you have a lot to say about it. We can continue later. What are some of the things you talked about at your tables? Maybe someone in the middle area there. Anybody?
Come on.
So I'm with the trend with trying to limit sex education for children.
Okay. Yep, several of the titles mentioned sex education or being sexually explicit, which really, are 2 different things, though sometimes people conflate those as being the same thing.
Oh, I was going to say a lot of books about the LGBT.
Yeah, 7 of the top 10 are by or about members of the LGBTQ community. 70%.
We were talking at our table, this feels kind of reminiscent of the Satanic Panic in the 80s, when gay people were first coming out of the closet, and there was a whole lot of talk that gay people shouldn't be around children, they shouldn't exist around children because they automatically, every gay person must be a pedophile, right? It must be terrible. And this feels like the same thing coming around again.
Yeah, that's a good correlation to make. And it kind of ties back to what you were saying earlier, too, about misinformation and dramatizing things, right? This idea that because of someone's sexuality or their gender that they are automatically dangerous in some way, which is not true.
Automatically, if it's talking about somebody's sexual identity, it's about promoting sex. That there's something pornographic about acknowledging homosexuality, but the standard of heterosexuality, which is in tons of books and
Kids have read books about kids having crushes on each other or their first kiss or anything forever. The problem is when it became not straight heterosexual, that all of a sudden means that it's actually now about the sex as opposed to that being
just a part of the story,
Right.
right? Yes. I think there's probably a lot of truth to that. So, overall, I'm going to kind of go away from the top 10 and just talk about overall in 2023, 47% of those 4,240 titles that we mentioned before that were targeted for censorship represented the voices and lived experiences of LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC, meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color individuals. Emily Drabinski, who is the 2023-24 ALA president, has commented on this, and this is what she said. Our communities are stronger because of diversity. Libraries that reflect their community's diversity promote learning and empathy that some people want to hide or eliminate. So, another question for you. Who might want to silence these voices? If nearly half of the challenges were targeting people in the LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC communities, who might want that? Who might want to eliminate that voice, and why?
It's not a very popular thing to talk about, and it sucks that we have to say this and have to be around this, but a lot of the Christian community and people who follow the Bible think it is inherently blasphemous to be anything other than heterosexual, which shouldn't be true and also is very not cool. But that is one group who specifically targets these people.
Okay, and I think this ties back maybe to misinformation again, right? Or like trying to like spread these ideas that aren't really founded in any kind of truth.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just kind of curious to like what age range these books are being banned in, because you mentioned that one of them was meant for older kids like 10th and 11th grade, but that kind of insinuates that all of the other books were meant for younger kids.
Good question. Yeah, not necessarily. The books for people of all age ranges are targets of attempted censorship. I don't know what the breakdown is as far as like of these 4,200, like how many were for different age ranges. But one thing I've noticed is that when people are trying to get books banned, they will make it seem like a book for young adults or a book for adults is being handed out to like second graders, which is not true. And, saying like this is in elementary schools when it might actually be in high school. So that's that misinformation again. And one of the things about misinformation is that once it's out there, you can't really take it back, right? We all have confirmation bias, which means once we know a thing, right? We know a thing, we believe it, and then we tend to listen to and believe information that confirms that, and any new information that might go against it, we're not so sure about listening to that, or we're really critical of it. So we have to catch ourselves and go, okay, let me look at the actual facts here. And sometimes we have to change our minds, and it's a good thing if we can do that.
Or I guess group of people that do want to sort of suppress these books are mostly of religious, Christianity and everything. But at the same time, I feel like we should still point out that even though there is a big theme of Christian people wanting to ban books, we shouldn't come at like this category of people as like all of them are evil, because it feels it's basically the same of what they're doing, what the Christian people are doing. Christian people who want to ban these books want to do against the LGBTQ community members. It's them writing against them back.
We shouldn't generalize, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Shouldn't generalize.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's such a good point, that we don't want to stereotype, right? We don't want to throw everyone into a category. because we're seeing some examples. And we just had, I think maybe some of you were at the Human Library this week, right? One of our books is in the room. And two of our books, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. The whole point of it, right, was to challenge stereotypes and unjudge people. So we don't want to turn around and do the same thing back when we see that happening.
Well,
Yes, Paul?
I would just say things I've noticed anecdotally, and I wish I could remember specific names, because there's Christians on both sides of this issue, there's Muslims on both sides of this issue, there's religious people that want the freedom and ones that want a little more control of morality or specific morality. But anecdotally, what I have seen a lot over the last 20 years is the most outspoken people that are really particularly against the queer community or the LGBTQ plus community quite often are projecting something. We've seen lots of lawmakers that were very anti-gay, turns out they're gay. We've seen lots of people push for book bans and then find out that they were actually the ones that were doing inappropriate things with kids. And again, that's anecdotal. I have no idea what the broadness is,
Right.
but I think that is something worth keeping in mind in some of this.
Sure. Yeah, there are some examples of that, and we don't want to paint with a broad stroke, right? That's not applicable to everyone, but sometimes that's the case, and it's probably because of the stigmas and the stereotypes that are out there that people don't feel free to be themselves. You know, there's a lot of fear involved, and so then they might be sort of acting out against a thing rather than saying, hey, let's talk about this.
I would give one broad category that I think might apply without being stereotypical. People who don't know gay folks. People who don't, that there's more discomfort. I've certainly seen it here at the college, students that never met a Muslim and felt very uncomfortable around Muslims until they got a Muslim friend. There is something about just having human contact that has a tendency to make us more comfortable with ideas that might have been uncomfortable for us to start off with.
Yes. Yeah, it always makes a difference, right? When you know a real person and you can have that personal connection with them rather than just like something about these other people, right? Did you have something, June?
I would also suggest that maybe people who have historically been in groups that are in power and have social capital, that might feel like that is somehow being threatened.
Yeah, an excellent point. When people who are in power don't want to lose power, right? And there's this misconception that by allowing other people to have a voice, you somehow will lose yours, which is not true. We want everyone to be able to have a voice. And the more voices we hear, the more experiences we learn about, the better off we are. And that's not to say that all of us have to learn about all the things. I guess the point tonight is you should get to choose. Okay, I want to share a few more words from Emily Drabinski. This is the ALA president. And she said, in looking at the titles of the most challenged books from last year, it's obvious that the pressure groups, and Barry, you brought this up earlier, right? There are some groups out there, are targeting books about LGBTQIA+ people and people of color. At ALA, we are fighting for the freedom to choose what you want to read. Shining a light on the harmful workings of these pressure groups is one of the actions we must take to protect our right to read. And from Deborah Caldwell-Stone, who's the director of the ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom, she said, these are books that contain the ideas, the opinions, and the voices that censors want to silence. Stories by and about LGBTQ+ persons and people of color. Caldwell-Stone goes on to say, each challenge, each demand to censor these books is an attack on our freedom to read, our right to live the life we choose, and an attack on libraries as community institutions that reflect the rich diversity of our nation. When we tolerate censorship, we risk losing all of this. During National Library Week, we should all take action to protect and preserve libraries and our rights. And this right now is National Library Week, which I'll say more about later. So there have been increasing efforts across the country to restrict reading material not only by individuals and these pressure groups that we've heard about, but also through legislation. You may have heard of the Don't Say Gay bill that was passed in Florida in 2022. There was a bill passed in Indiana to ban bad books in 2023. I'm not sure what that means, bad books. And there have been many other bills proposed that are similar. The ALA works in partnership with state associations to assess the impacts of proposed legislation, both positive and adverse, and to support the state's coordinated responses. So this graphic is specific to 2024. The ALA has a total of 102 bills tracked here, and that includes 5 in Nebraska. And you'll notice that on this map, Nebraska's kind of started to move to the darker shade. In addition to legislation, what's happening right here in Nebraska? In the last year and a half, you may have noticed some news articles about challenges that were happening at the Keene Memorial Library in Fremont, Nebraska, just down the road from here. This book is Gay. This was the #3 most challenged book last year. It's a nonfiction book by Juno Dawson, and it was challenged in Fremont. And beyond discussing topics directly related to sexual intercourse, This Book is Gay covers the well-being and the relationship and the nurturing side of sexual relationships, which Dawson states was really important to her so that young queer people can picture a future for themselves as well-adjusted queer adults. The book has won multiple awards, including the Booklist Editor's Choice Books for Youth of Older Readers category in 2015, and the Garden State Teen Book Awards Nonfiction for grades 6 through 12. That was awarded in 2018. The book's tone is upbeat, and the writing style is candid, witty, and conversational. It is considered a young adult book, typically for upper grades, again, that 10th through 12th grade. And chapter 1 begins, "There's a long-running joke that on coming out, a young lesbian, gay guy, bisexual, or trans person should receive a membership card and instruction manual." This is that instruction manual. One of the individuals who requested the book be removed from the Keene Memorial Library collection called it, quote, "grossly obscene and pornographic." Ultimately, after review, the decision was made to keep the book in the collection, but to move it from the young adult section to the adult section. Moving a book out of the section for its intended readers can also be considered a form of restriction. So a little bit more about what's been going on in our home state. Last month, at the Nebraska State Board of Education meeting, board member Kirk Penner proposed a revision to state regulation Rule 10 to prohibit pornographic materials or sexually explicit content in all Nebraska public school libraries. The majority of the board voted against discussing it further, letting Penner's proposal die with a vote of 5-3. Deborah Neary, another board member, said, "In everything I've read, everybody points out that these book bans overwhelmingly target books about race, racism, gender, sexuality, and books by Black and LGBTQ authors." Penner introduced his revision with a presentation that highlighted specific books like The Bluest Eye by Nobel Prize in Literature and Pulitzer Prize for Fiction recipient Toni Morrison. The Bluest Eye is a novel that explores the damaging effects of societal standards on a young Black girl's sense of self-worth. It explores the brutal realities of racism and the importance of self-acceptance in the face of adversity. Toni Morrison says that in this book, she wanted to explore the, quote, "tragic and disabling consequences of accepting rejection as legitimate." When people say this is pornography or this is obscene, something we have to take into consideration is that there are actual definitions for those words. They're not a matter of opinion. So when someone starts throwing those words around and labeling books as being pornographic or being obscene, we should look to the definitions. And in the case of obscenity, there is a legal test to determine whether or not something qualifies in that way. So if you hear some of those words used in attempts to ban books, maybe just be a little curious about how those words are being used. So we know a little bit about the book. We can fast forward a few days from that state school board meeting and bring it again a little closer to home. At the March Norfolk Public School Board meeting, a community member rehashed what Kirk Penner had said the previous week at the state school board meeting. And the superintendent at Norfolk Public Schools said, after Penner's complaints at that board meeting, she was having a committee pull the Bluest Eye from the high school library to review it. She also said she reached out to Kirk Penner to ask him for a list of other books he objects to. So I'm going to pause here to say that libraries and schools have official processes to follow when it comes to both acquisition of materials and removal of materials. There's a process for someone to request reconsideration of materials in a library collection. So earlier I mentioned maybe there's a mom of an elementary student, right? And they're like, oh, I don't know about this book. There's a step-by-step process to go through to ask the librarian to reconsider that and see if it should remain in the collection or if it should be removed or placed in a different section, all those kinds of decisions. Public comment at open meetings is not part of that process, and actively asking people to send their complaints is also not part of that process. So earlier tonight, we looked at some key terms: book challenges, book bans, and censorship. Another important term is quiet censorship, which is sometimes called soft censorship or self-censorship. These words are used sort of interchangeably. A good way to think about quiet censorship is that it's asking who's going to complain about this rather than asking who needs this. Judy Ehrenstein, a children's librarian who was writing for the Association of Library Service to Children Network on their blog in February of this year, had this to say: quiet or soft censorship can be defined as not purchasing materials because of personal reservations rather than a professional evaluation of the need for them. It is not purchasing materials, weeding or restricting access as a way to avoid controversy. It is not putting something into a display. It is using a sticker on a cover or coloring in an internal image. Each of these decisions affects our library users. This too is censorship. This is a way of restricting access based on what one person or one group thinks or what they might do or what they might say. And as we've already said tonight, each person should have their own choice. If there's a book, I wear a lot of different hats, but I'm a parent, and as a parent, if I don't want my child to read a book, that's between me and my child, right? I'm gonna have that conversation with them. It's not for me to decide that all of you can't read that book or that your children aren't allowed to have access. So we want people to have choice. I don't know for sure what steps have been taken since that local March school board meeting, but if you're concerned about what's happening with the Bluest Eye and the list of other books requested from Kirk Penner, some questions you might ask include: where is the school in the process? Which books are being reconsidered? Who's on the committee? How were those people selected or appointed? Did the committee members read the book or the books in their entirety, which is standard in the reconsideration process, because excerpts cannot be appropriately evaluated out of context. What decisions have been made? What criteria did they use to make those decisions? There are all kinds of things you can do to support the freedom to read. And what better time to do it? As I said, it's National Library Week. So on Monday we had the Right to Read Day, Tuesday it was National Library Workers Day, Wednesday, National Library Outreach Day and National Bookmobile Day, and Thursday, today, is National Support Teen Literature Day. The whole month of April is sort of called School Library Month by the American Association of School Librarians since 1995. And then it's also National Poetry Month, which April has been since 1996. So National Library Week is a time to celebrate the contributions of our nation's libraries and librarians and to promote library use and support. If you're not sure what to think about all this or what other people think about all this, research indicates that voters oppose book bans in libraries. Polling shows voters oppose efforts to remove books from libraries and that people have confidence in libraries to make good decisions about their collections. So even though there's a lot of stuff in the news and it seems like, oh my gosh, everyone's upset and wants all these books banned, it's really a very small number of people. Most people support libraries and want books to be available. Large majorities of voters, over 70%, oppose efforts to have books removed from their public libraries, including, and I'm going to give you a breakdown by party lines, because I found it to be a little bit surprising. A majority of Democrats, 75%, Independents, 58%, and 70% of Republicans oppose efforts to restrict materials. Most voters and parents hold libraries in high regard, have confidence in their local libraries to make good decisions about what books to include in their collections, and agree that libraries in their communities do a good job offering books that represent a variety of viewpoints. And this is all from research conducted by Hart Research Associates and North Star Opinion Research in March of 2022, and I have the key findings with me if you'd like to see them. So I guess all this is to say, if you appreciate libraries and you trust in the work they do to ensure access to information, let them know or take some action to show your support. It goes a long way. If you're concerned about preserving your own ability to choose and to have access to reading material or supporting that right for other people, you can get involved at the local level with initiatives like Unite Against Book Bans. This is an initiative of the American Library Association, and it provides great resources, including book resumes, a guide to attending library and school board meetings. There's also a place where you can report censorship, report censorship attempts, and you can scan the QR code to go to the website or visit uniteagainstbookbans.org. And each resume for these books provides the significance and educational value, including a synopsis, reviews from professional journals. So not all reviews are created equal, right? So these are from professional journals, awards and accolades. And there's also a sign up here if you want to scan the QR code later on. So I'm going to kind of wrap up here where I began tonight with a quote from the American Library Association's Freedom to Read statement. It closes like this: freedom itself is a dangerous way of life, but it is ours. I would love to answer your questions if you have any, or continue the discussion.
How do you feel about a possible grading system towards books? Very similar to how video games or movies get graded, of like E for everyone, M for mature, R rated, and applying that to sort of books. Do you think would be a good way to both divide books into categories for both parents and children to be able to see a book and be like, oh, this is rated R, maybe this might be a little too much for me? Or do you think it would be more of a bad influence on books and separating them out and further progressing the sort of separations of like, you shouldn't be reading that at all and stuff like that?
Right. Yeah, well, and it makes sense that people would have that question, right? Because it's something that we do with other kinds of things. You mentioned video games and movies. The American Library Association stance on it is no, we should not be labeling books, because like you said, then it, sort of like eliminates things from people's perception of what might be possible for them. If parents are looking for some guides, these professional journals and professional organizations, they're librarians, there are lots of ways to find out what the recommended reading level and recommended interest level is. And that's a way of determining, like, for maybe the average person of this grade level or age, it might be appropriate or of interest to them, rather than kind of like stamping it as like, this isn't for you. So it's a little bit more flexible. And I think this, I'll say this as a parent again. So I had a child who was reading at like upper high school level, like 12th grade level, when they were in about 3rd, 4th grade. So their reading level was super high, but their interest level was still, they were still in 3rd grade, right? And so this is a child who was like, oh my gosh, if I get one more chapter book, they'd read a chapter book in an hour and just like piling them up. And so they started to go to the young adult section of the school library and the public library to select books. And the conversation we had together, as parent and child was, you know what you're interested in and you know what you're comfortable with. If you start reading a book and you find that the characters are talking about things that you're not interested in or that you don't really have any like life experience about, or if you read it and you're like, ooh, that's not language I'm comfortable with, or like the characters are doing drugs and I don't, that's not for me, put it down and pick up a different book. And just in having those conversations, this is a child who was able to learn how to make those decisions and was, pretty comfortable with the books that they were reading.
Have you ever been asked to remove a book from the shelves here?
Since I have been here at Northeast working in the library, we haven't ever had someone fill out the request for reconsideration.
Now I feel like I need to do that just for the experience.
One of the questions, Paul, will be, have you read the book in its entirety?
I won't have.
Okay.
So, I guess, do you believe in total openness of books and no censorship, no labeling at all of like sort of anything that could be of a book? Do you possibly, I guess this is a very much personal question, but like I said, there are like things that can be very sensitive, just like sexual stuff, and teaching children about that. But at the same time, couldn't it lead to like misunderstandings if we're just shoving anatomy books into preschoolers' hands of like, the people do this, people do that, and these children not being very well introduced into these sort of ideas can create their own misinterpretations about it.
Yeah, that's a valid concern, and I will come back to kind of talking about the professionalship of teachers and librarians who, like, if you're a preschool teacher, you know through your training and your experience what's appropriate for that grade level, right? So there is sometimes this idea that like not censoring means like giving a 5-year-old a book that's really meant for adults, and that's not happening in schools, and it's not happening really in libraries. Like 5-year-olds aren't interested in that stuff. They don't have the reading level for it, there are not a lot of like really young children out there, running around getting the A&P textbook off the shelf somewhere. So I do not support any kind of censorship, but that being said, like you brought up sex education, right? Age-appropriate sex education helps students of all ages make sure that they're staying safe, right? So they learn what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. How is someone, if someone touches you in this way and it makes you uncomfortable, tell a trusted adult. Those kinds of things. It's not, demonstrating for them different sexual positions. And some people have that in their minds, but that's not what is happening.
I'm wondering if I misunderstand the term censorship, because it sounds to me like some censorship is okay in term, or not even okay, desirable. We don't want to present certain information to kids. And it seems to me that you could call that censorship. But I'm thinking more of like high school age, where, I think a lot of us are uncomfortable with the idea of censoring books for a 16-year-old. Like they're old enough to kind of figure it out. At the same time, when I was in high school, before the internet, when teenage boys got their hands on nudie magazines, if my library had like Playboys and whatnot, I would have checked them out. Or even, what I would say even worse, if my library had, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the old Faces of Death series, which I unfortunately saw a little bit of when I was a kid, when I was in high school, and it was very traumatizing. These are videos of watching people die. But if my library had it, I'm positive I would have had friends that were checking out. I would have seen a whole lot of it. And so having a professional that makes the decision of, we don't need this here, this is not an educational tool for our students, you know, porn is not a good way to really learn about sex, so we're not going to include it. Is that not censorship?
I would not consider it censorship because we're making decisions all the time about what will best serve our communities. So I don't know of any libraries that have actual pornography. Now, there are people out there saying this is porn and that is porn, but there's an actual definition for pornography, and it includes something about the intent, you know, behind it. So, like, I don't know, Hustler or Playboy magazine, those, you're not going to find that in your local library.
They're not.
And you're definitely not going to find it in your schools, right? So there's just not a lot of like literary merit. Those are not out there like winning national book awards and, you know, those kinds of things. So librarians and school media specialists are looking to professional organizations that where the people who work there are involved in those organizations have training, and they're determining whether something has literary value, if it is representative of voices that need to be uplifted in a community. And that's going to vary from one community to another, right? You want to represent your population and what kind of information and stories people in your local community need access to, whether it's to see themselves or people who are different from them represented. So porn doesn't really fit that need, right? And so it's not included in a library collection.
I'm not sure if you would have the answer. That it's a pretty specific question that unfortunately I do not know. I'm pretty sure it's in the top 10. June, you might know which one I'm talking about. It made the news a lot because it actually has a visual depiction of oral sex, I believe. Out of those top 10 banned books. I may be, does anybody know which book I'm talking about up there?
Winters in Alaska?
Is it Winters in Alaska?
I'm not sure.
It was one that was
Is it
really,
a graphic novel or
yes,
it's
yeah,
like
graphic
written?
novel.
Okay.
Graphic novel.
I'm not sure.
When we say that, you know, these things never pop up in libraries, they're not used. Every now and then you do get kind of a rogue librarian. Like I imagine there's a kernel of truth in that somebody was pushing the boundaries. Maybe a 6th grader got their hands on a book that was really, you know, meant for a 10th grader.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate of me to say that it is possible that there have been times that mistakes have been made?
Oh, certainly. I mean, I think there have been many times when someone has requested reconsideration of library materials, and then going through that formalized process, you know, whoever's making that decision in the library might realize, like, this was miscategorized. Like, that could happen, right? And so maybe it does need to be shelved in a different place. And I think librarians tend to be, and you know, again, we don't want to stereotype, but the librarians I know are pretty good about, like, if they make a mistake, they're going to admit it and be like, you know what, let's know better, do better, right? Let's make the change that needs to be made in the best interest of everyone.
And of course, librarians do have a reputation for being wild party animals that do crazy things all the time.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned as an example about a graphic novel depicting in images oral sex. And so I guess some people may have an idea in their minds that that equals pornography, but that's not the case, right? I mean, some pornography may depict oral sex, but oral sex in itself is not pornographic.
Sure, and we do, our schools work to make sure things are age appropriate.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily inappropriate for a 16-year-old to have access to something that depicts something they may be doing in their life already or maybe around the corner. Is that what we're saying? Again,
Yeah.
that's a broad statement.
Right, it's a broad statement. I do think, when people are facing something in their own lives, it's helpful to have access to materials that are addressing that. I also have often talked with students, like Paul mentioned earlier, I taught high school English and language arts for a long time, and I talked with my students about imaginative rehearsals, right? So you're reading a book, and the main character is someone you're like, oh my gosh, I love this character. And then they come into a situation where they have to make a choice. Am I going to do drugs? Am I going to drive too fast? Am I going to have unprotected sex? Or whatever it is, right? And the reader gets to put themselves in that situation very safely, sitting at home, reading their book, right? And think, what if I were in that situation? What would I do? What would I say? And then they get to see what does the character do. And they're either saying, oh, good job, you made the right choice. Or most of the time, because it's dramatic, they're going, oh no, like don't do that. And then when that comes up in that person, that reader's life later on, they've already kind of thought about these things. And they're in a better position, hopefully, to make a good choice for themselves. So, if we're saying, and I'm not saying this is true for me or whoever, but I think there are some people who are like, oh, these 16-year-olds shouldn't be having sex, so therefore we shouldn't talk about it, and they shouldn't read about it, and. But the fact is, some of them are going to have sex. My opinion, both as a parent and as a professional, is that if they're going to be doing that, I hope they will learn how to be safe and respectful, right? I want people to know about consent and about how to be safe for themselves and their partners. And so, again, it comes back to, if it's your child, as a parent, have that conversation. If any parent out there doesn't want their child to read a book that includes sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or whatever, have that conversation at home. You can limit your own child's access to information, but not everyone else's.
Do parents have the ability normally to go to the school librarian and say, I do not want you to let my child check this book out? Is that an option?
I think most school, I don't know if they have official processes set up, but I think there are times when parents can say hey, I don't want my child to have this. Every school library kind of has their own way of handling things. So I can't answer for everyone, but parents definitely have the ability to be very involved in their students' education. They have access to the catalog, right? They can go online and see what books are available in the library, talk with their kids about whether, what they recommend they read, those kinds of things. And for the most part, teachers and school librarians are very happy to partner with parents. Teachers want parents to be involved in their kids' lives and to help them through the learning process. So again, I can't answer for everyone, but that's just what I have observed, is that people are helpful.
Any other questions out there? I do have one more question. I won't ask it if somebody else asks a question. All right, so here's my final question.
Okay.
It seems to me that there are, because I think what we're saying is, while individual parents, it's appropriate to come in, make requests, work with the librarian on a book that they've read, or any member of the community even maybe. There's a difference between that and mass bannings where people are making lists, they haven't read the book, they're just kind of on this crusade to eliminate certain ideas. But, and I think I know part of the answer is you're going to say good librarians and these professionals are not going to put certain books in their library. But what if there are books that don't just depict violence, don't just depict something bad? I remember reading a book in junior high where the students get together and they try to beat up a teacher and they accidentally kill the teacher. And the year after I was done, the school decided they weren't going to teach that one anymore. But the whole message of the book was this is a bad thing to do.
Right.
But there's literature out there. There are books out there that encourage violence. We have some religious extremist books, right? I wouldn't want a pro-jihadist book in my school. And I do understand there might be some professionals that would say, hey, the students need to have the right to look at this stuff. Is there ever any time where we say something is so immoral, it is totally appropriate to censor it. Not just make a decision whether or not it's appropriate, but to say like, this just is, having this out here is hurtful.
I probably wouldn't label that as censorship. I would think of it as making an informed decision about what to include in the collection. Because there are so many books, right? We cannot possibly have all the books in the collection. So every time we add something to the collection, we're having to make a selection. And so if there are books that clearly have false information in them, or are attempting to harm someone, particularly someone from a historically marginalized community, I just don't think librarians are putting that on their shelves. Shelf space is so valuable that it's going to go to some other book that is, winning some awards and that there's a high demand for, that it's going to help more people in the community. So, but that's not to say that those books shouldn't exist. That's not for me to decide, right? And I think it does kind of tie back to appropriate, like grade level, age level, because there might be professionals, who study these kinds of things that need access to that book to see what are people saying, what are people trying to get other people to do, and they need to know that in order to combat the bad things that are, kind of going on. So there's a reason for all kinds of books, but we're not probably gonna, put that in a 6th grade classroom, right? There's a place for it. And we also should keep in mind that publishers are making a choice about what, is deserving of having an audience. Now, if it's self-published and people, do that on their own, that's different. But I will say again, librarians who are developing a collection are taking that into consideration. There are going to be really reputable publishers out there, and if you're not familiar with the publisher, or if it's something that some guy in his basement typed out like this and then printed off, there's a real difference there between that and HarperCollins.
So you're saying trust authority?
Yeah.
Oh my!
Professional authority. Yeah.
That's a good qualifier.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, well, I'll hang around. If anybody has questions you don't want to ask in front of the whole group, I'd love to continue the conversation. I want to thank you so much for coming out and spending your time thinking about this topic. It's one that's dear to me and hopefully means something to you as well. So thank you.
And thank you again, everybody, for coming out to the final Hot Talk of the season. We're going to be picking these up again on the 2nd Thursday of September. Next season, we're working on putting together a very science-focused series. There'll still be some humanities type things in there, but I'm hoping to get some geneticist stuff and some physics and biology and all that. Students who might be getting extra credit, please make sure you sign in over there, write down your name and your instructor's name so I can email them, but write it clearly enough that I can actually figure out what your name is. And students, there is a little bit of food left, and you should be doing what students in college always do, take free food. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. I'll see you next year.
And if you want to take a book home with you, check it out. Don't just walk off with it.
Yeah.
I can check it out for you. And these that I was using as examples are up here too.